Anthony John wasn't a man you approached without an invitation. He was the kingmaker of Chicago, the silent architect behind every power shift in the city, the shadow that decided which politicians rose and which rivals simply vanished. But his greatest vulnerability wasn't a federal investigation or a rival family. It was his 3-year-old son, Samuel. The boy with golden curls had never uttered a single word. Specialists called it severe developmental trauma, but Anthony called it his deepest failure. That silence shattered on a cold Thursday evening at the Sterling Room when the most feared man in Illinois felt his blood run cold, because for the first time in his life, Samuel spoke. He didn't call for his father. He lifted his small hand, pointed directly at a waitress with dark eyes and trembling hands, and said one word that would threaten to destroy everything Anthony had built. Mom. The wind howled against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Room, an exclusive steakhouse perched on the 40th floor of the Hancock Building. This wasn't a restaurant where people came just to eat prime cuts and drink 100-year-old scotch. This was where Chicago's power brokers sealed deals worth millions, where judges received their instructions over dessert, and where, occasionally, someone's career, or life, ended quietly between the appetizer and the main course. Linda Martinez straightened her collar in the staff bathroom, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the white fabric against her black button-down shirt. She was 27, though the exhaustion etched around her brown eyes made her look older. The dark circles beneath them told stories she'd never share with her coworkers. Stories of double shifts, of sending money to her mother in Arizona, of grief so deep it had hollowed her out from the inside. She'd been working at the Sterling Room for exactly 2 months, long enough to know which tables tipped well, which guests demanded silence, and which ones you avoided eye contact with at all costs. Linda! The voice of Marcus, the floor manager, cut through her thoughts. He was a nervous man in his 50s who perpetually looked like he was one mistake away from a heart attack. Table 7, VIP section, and for the love of God, do not screw this up. Linda frowned, checking her apron for the 3rd time. Who is it? Alderman Ross again? Marcus's face went pale. He actually grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. Worse, Anthony John. The kitchen went silent. The sous chef stopped plating. Even Carlos, the dishwasher who'd seen everything in his 40 years in Chicago restaurants, looked up with something like fear in his eyes. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. Anthony John wasn't just connected, he was the connection. The newspapers called him a legitimate businessman with interests in construction, waste management, and real estate development. The streets knew different. He was the invisible hand that controlled half the city's infrastructure, the man who'd transformed the John family from street-level thugs into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that even the FBI couldn't touch. He was also, according to the tabloids, a widower raising a traumatized son alone. I'll take it, Linda whispered, though every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to walk out the back door and never return. She needed the money. She always needed the money. Linda pushed through the double doors onto the main floor. The atmosphere had shifted from the usual low hum of conversation to something heavier, more cautious. Diners spoke in whispers. Even the sommelier moved with exaggerated care, as if afraid to make noise. At table 7, the best seat in the house, positioned in an alcove with a view of the glittering city lights, but secluded from other guests, sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and dressed in Italian wool. Anthony John was 35 years old, and every inch of him radiated controlled power. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Linda made in 6 months, tailored perfectly to his 6'2" frame. His dark beard was meticulously groomed, threaded with just enough gray to make him look distinguished rather than old. But it was the tattoos that caught her attention, intricate Celtic designs that crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, remnants of a younger, more violent version of himself that the expensive suits tried to hide. His hazel eyes swept the restaurant like a predator scanning for threats, noting exits, counting security personnel, calculating angles. Those eyes had seen things, done things. Linda knew that look, the look of someone who'd survived by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But it wasn't the man that made Linda breath catch. It was the child. Sitting beside him in a custom-made booster seat was a little boy, perhaps 3 years old. He had golden blonde curls that caught the light, making him look almost angelic, and bright blue eyes that stared at nothing in particular. He wore a tiny navy suit, a miniature version of his father, complete with a pressed white shirt and a small tie. In his arms, he clutched a worn stuffed lion, its mane frayed from years of holding. This was Samuel John, the silent heir. Linda had heard the whispers among the staff, the child who'd never spoken, who'd been to every specialist in 3 states, who represented both Anthony John's greatest love and his most profound failure. Linda approached the table, wine bottle in hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome to the Sterling Room. May I start you with still or sparkling water?" Anthony didn't look up from the menu. His voice was low, controlled, with a faint Chicago accent he'd never quite lost. "Sparkling, room temperature, and warm milk for the boy. Not hot, warm, exactly 98 degrees. "Of course." Linda reached across to pour water into his crystal glass. As she leaned forward, her wrist brushed against the edge of the table. A faint scent drifted from her skin, the cheap vanilla body wash she'd bought at Walgreens mixed with the lavender hand cream that kept her fingers from cracking during Chicago's brutal winters. Anthony stiffened. His eyes snapped up, locking onto hers with an intensity that nearly made her drop the bottle. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Confusion? Pain? But it vanished so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it, replaced with cold, calculated indifference. "Be quick with it," he ordered, his tone dismissive. Linda nodded, her throat tight. She turned to the child, softening her voice instinctively. "And you, sweetheart, are you hungry?" She didn't expect a response. Everyone knew Samuel John didn't speak. But as Linda crouched down to his eye level, something shifted in the air. Samuel slowly lifted his head, his blue eyes, which had been staring at nothing, suddenly focused, fixed, locked onto Linda's face with an intensity that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old. Linda felt it, a physical jolt that ran through her chest like an electric current. Recognition, not the vague sense of having seen someone before, but something deeper, more primal, cellular. That sensation she hadn't felt in 3 years, not since she'd woken up in that Geneva clinic, drugged and disoriented, to a doctor's grim voice saying, "I'm so sorry, Miss Martinez. There were complications. Your baby didn't survive." That phantom ache in her womb, the one that woke her up crying some nights, flared sudden and violent. Samuel's stuffed lion slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. The boy's mouth opened, his bottom lip trembled, tears welled in those impossibly blue eyes. Anthony noticed immediately. He leaned forward, his entire demeanor shifting from distant crime boss to panicked father in an instant. "Samuel, buddy, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Do you need—" But Samuel wasn't looking at his father. He reached out with both small hands towards Linda, his fingers grasping at her apron, at the air between them, desperate and urgent. Linda stood frozen, the wine bottle trembling in her hand. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She felt an overwhelming, inexplicable urge to drop everything and pull this child into her arms, to protect him from something she couldn't name. Then it happened. The sound was small, rusty, broken, like a voice that had never been used, struggling to form words for the first time. Ma? Anthony John froze mid-reach. He slowly turned his head from his son to Linda, his hand instinctively moving toward the inside of his jacket, where Linda somehow knew a gun rested against his ribs. Ma? Mom! Samuel's voice grew louder, more insistent. The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Waitstaff stopped moving. Even the sommelier in the corner let his hands still on the keys. Linda's eyes filled with tears she couldn't explain. "I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping backward. "I don't know. I should go." But Samuel lunged forward in his booster seat, the safety straps straining. He was screaming now, not in fear or pain, but in pure, desperate longing. He pointed his small finger directly at Linda's face, his entire body reaching toward her. "Mom!" the child shrieked, the word echoing off the vaulted ceilings, bouncing off the windows, impossible to ignore. "Mom, up! Mom, up!" Anthony John rose to his full height. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a warning shot. He was tall, imposing, radiating a dangerous energy that made every security guard in the room reach for their weapons. He looked at his son, the child who had never spoken a single word in 3 years, reaching for a stranger. Then he looked at Linda. His face was a mask of confusion and rising fury, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "Who are you?" Anthony's voice was low, deadly, a growl that promised violence. "Who sent you here?" "Nobody," Linda breathed, backing away, clutching the wine bottle like a weapon. "I'm just a waitress. I've never seen you before, I swear." "My son," Anthony said, stepping around the table, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. "My son has never spoken a single word in his entire life. Not to me, not to his doctors, not to anyone." He moved closer, towering over her. "And tonight he calls you mother." He grabbed Linda's wrist. His grip was iron. He yanked her arm up, examining the inside of her forearm under the light, searching for something. A tattoo, a wire, a tracking device, some explanation for the impossible. "Let me go," Linda cried out, trying to pull free. "Daddy, no!" Samuel screamed, a full sentence, clear and unmistakable. "Daddy, no hurt Mom!" The staff stood paralyzed. Marcus had his phone out, finger hovering over 911, but one of Anthony's security men, a mountain of a person in a black suit, simply shook his head. A clear message: no police, not here, not ever. Anthony stared at Linda, his breathing ragged. He studied her face with an intensity that felt like being x-rayed. He looked at her eyes, brown with flecks of amber. He looked at the shape of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone. Then he looked back at Samuel. The resemblance was faint, barely there, hidden beneath baby fat and different coloring, but it existed. In the eyes, in the shape of the mouth. But that was impossible. Anthony's wife, Catherine, had died giving birth to Samuel in a private clinic in Geneva, 3 years ago. Anthony had identified the body. He'd buried her. He'd mourned her. Unless the last 3 years had been built on a lie. Anthony released Linda's wrist, but didn't step back. He signaled to his head of security, a man named James, who looked like he could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. "Clear the restaurant," Anthony ordered, never taking his eyes off Linda. "Boss?" James questioned, uncertain. "Everyone out, now." Anthony reached down and picked up a butter knife from the table. He slammed it against his water glass so hard the crystal shattered. The sharp sound of breaking glass cut through the murmurs. "The Sterling room is closed," Anthony announced to the room, his voice carrying authority that no one dared question. "Everyone leaves now. Your meals are complimentary. Security will escort you out." Panic rippled through the dining room. Patrons grabbed coats and purses, practically running for the elevators. Marcus herded the kitchen staff toward the service entrance, his face white with terror. Within 90 seconds, the Starling room was empty, except for Anthony, his sobbing son, 3 security guards, and a terrified Linda Martinez. Anthony scooped Samuel into his arms. The boy stopped crying immediately at his father's touch, but he kept reaching over Anthony's shoulder toward Linda, his small hands grasping at air. Anthony turned to face Linda fully. She'd backed up against the bar, trapped, nowhere left to run. "You're not going home tonight, miss." He glanced at her name tag, Martinez. "You can't do this," Linda whispered, her voice breaking. "This is kidnapping. I'll scream. I'll—" "Scream all you want," Anthony said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "We're 40 floors up, soundproof windows, and everyone who works here knows better than to call the police on me." He adjusted Samuel on his hip, wiping a tear from his flushed cheek with surprising gentleness. "Until I understand why my son, who hasn't spoken a word in 3 years, thinks you're his mother, you belong to me." He nodded to James. "Bring the car around. Back entrance. We're going to the estate." As James moved toward Linda, Linda felt a sudden, sharp memory pierce through her mind like a knife. A memory she'd buried, suppressed, tried to forget. A cold hospital room, fluorescent lights, a beeping monitor, heavy sedation pulling her under, and a man's voice, not a doctor's voice, someone else's, saying urgently, "Take the baby before she wakes up. Make sure she never sees him." The memory hit her so hard she gasped, clutching at the bar for support. As James approached with a black hood, standard protocol for transport when someone didn't know where they were going, Linda's last coherent thought wasn't fear for herself. It was the absolute bone-deep certainty that she knew this child. That little boy with the golden curls and blue eyes and desperate cries for Mom. She had carried him. She had felt him grow inside her. She had given her birth to him. And somehow, impossibly, everyone had told her he was dead. As the hood came down over her head and strong hands guided her toward the service elevator, Linda made herself a promise. She would find out the truth, even if it killed her. The wind howled against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Room, an exclusive steakhouse perched on the 40th floor of the Hancock Building. This wasn't a restaurant where people came just to eat prime cuts and drink 100-year-old scotch. This was where Chicago's power brokers sealed deals worth millions, where judges received their instructions over dessert, and where occasionally someone's career or life ended quietly between the appetizer and the main course. Linda Martinez straightened her collar in the staff bathroom, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the white fabric against her black button-down shirt. She was 27, though the exhaustion etched around her brown eyes made her look older. The dark circles beneath them told stories she'd never share with her coworkers, stories of double shifts, of sending money to her mother in Arizona, of grief so deep it had hollowed her out from the inside. She'd been working at the Sterling Room for exactly 2 months, long enough to know which tables tipped well, which guests demanded silence, and which ones you avoided eye contact with at all costs. "Linda!" The voice of Marcus, the floor manager, cut through her thoughts. He was a nervous man in his 50s who perpetually looked like he was one mistake away from a heart attack. "Table 7, VIP section, and for the love of God, do not screw this up." Linda frowned, checking her apron for the 3rd time. "Who is it? Alderman Ross again?" Marcus's face went pale. He actually grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "Worse, Anthony John." The kitchen went silent. The sous chef stopped plating. Even Carlos, the dishwasher who'd seen everything in his 40 years in Chicago restaurants, looked up with something like fear in his eyes. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. Anthony John wasn't just connected, he was the connection. The newspapers called him a legitimate businessman with interests in construction, waste management, and real estate development. The streets knew different. He was the invisible hand that controlled half the city's infrastructure, the man who'd transformed the John crime family from street-level thugs into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that even the FBI couldn't touch. He was also, according to the tabloids, a widower raising a traumatized son alone, a 3-year-old who had never spoken a single word since birth. Specialists from Johns Hopkins to Mayo Clinic had examined him. Trauma-induced selective mutism, they said. Developmental delays, psychological damage from losing his mother. Nothing worked. No therapy, no medication. Just silence. "I'll take it," Linda whispered, though every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to walk out the back door and never return. She needed the money. She always needed the money. Linda pushed through the double doors onto the main floor. The atmosphere had shifted from the usual low hum of conversation to something heavier, more cautious. Diners spoke in whispers. Even the sommelier moved with exaggerated care, as if afraid to make noise. At table 7, the best seat in the house, positioned in an alcove with a view of the glittering city lights, but secluded from other guests, sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and dressed in Italian wool. Anthony John was 35 years old, and every inch of him radiated controlled power. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Linda made in 6 months, tailored perfectly to his 6'2" frame. His dark beard was meticulously groomed, threaded with just enough gray to make him look distinguished rather than old. But it was the tattoos that caught her attention. Intricate Celtic designs that crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, remnants of a younger, more violent version of himself that the expensive suits tried to hide. His hazel eyes swept the restaurant like a predator scanning for threats, noting exits, counting security personnel, calculating angles. Those eyes had seen things, done things. But it wasn't the man that made Linda breath catch. It was the child. Sitting beside him in a custom-made booster seat was a little boy, perhaps 3 years old. He had golden blonde curls that caught the light, making him look almost angelic, and bright blue eyes that stared at nothing in particular. He wore a tiny navy suit, a miniature version of his father's, complete with a pressed white shirt. In his arms, he clutched a worn stuffed lion, its mane frayed from years of constant holding. This was Samuel John, the silent heir. Linda approached the table, wine bottle in hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome to the Sterling Room. May I start you with still or sparkling water?" Anthony didn't look up from the menu. His voice was low, controlled. "Sparkling, room temperature, and warm milk for the boy. Not hot, warm. Exactly 98 degrees. Of course, Linda reached across to pour water into his crystal glass. As she leaned forward, her wrist braced against the edge of the table. A faint scent drifted from her skin, the cheap vanilla body wash she'd bought at Walgreens with a lavender hand cream. Anthony stiffened, his eyes snapped up, locking onto hers with an intensity that nearly made her drop the bottle. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition? Confusion? But it vanished, replaced by cold indifference. "Be quick about it," he ordered. Linda nodded, turning to the child. "And what about you, sweetheart?" She didn't expect a response. Everyone knew Samuel John didn't speak. But as Linda crouched to his eye level, something shifted. Samuel slowly lifted his head. His blue eyes, which had been staring at nothing, suddenly focused, fixed, locked onto Linda's face with impossible intensity. Linda felt it, a physical jolt through her chest. Recognition, not vague familiarity, but something deeper, primal. That sensation she hadn't felt in 3 years, not since she'd awoken in that Geneva clinic to a doctor's grim voice. "I'm so sorry, Miss Martinez. There were complications. Your baby didn't survive." That phantom ache in her womb flared sudden and violent. Samuel's stuffed lion slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. The boy's mouth opened, his bottom lip trembled, tears welled in his eyes. Anthony leaned forward, panicked. "Samuel? Buddy, what's wrong?" But Samuel wasn't looking at his father. He reached out with both small hands toward Linda, fingers grasping desperately at her apron. Then it happened. The sound was small, rusty, broken. Mom! Anthony froze. He slowly turned from his son to Linda, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket where a gun rested. "Mom!" Samuel's voice grew louder. The entire restaurant fell silent. Linda stepped backward. "I'm sorry, I should go." But Samuel lunged forward, screaming now in pure, desperate longing. He pointed directly at her face. "Mom, up! Mom, up!" Anthony rose to his full height, radiating dangerous energy. He looked at his son, reaching for a stranger, then at Linda. His face was confusion and fury and something else. Recognition. "Who are you?" His voice was deadly. "Who sent you?" "Nobody," Linda stammered. "I'm just a waitress." "My son has never spoken a single word in 3 years, and tonight he calls you mother." He grabbed her wrist, examining her forearm under the light, searching for tattoos, wires, marks. "Let me go," Linda cried. "Daddy, no!" Samuel screamed, a full sentence. "Daddy, no hurt Mom!" Anthony stared at Linda, breathing ragged. He studied her eyes, brown with amber flecks, the shape of her jaw, then looked back at Samuel. The resemblance was faint, hidden beneath baby fat and different coloring, but it was there, in the eyes. But that was impossible. Catherine had died giving birth in Geneva 3 years ago. He'd buried her. Unless the last 3 years had been a lie. Anthony released her wrist, but didn't step back. He signaled his head of security. "Clear the restaurant." "Boss?" "Everyone out, now." He slammed a butter knife against his water glass, shattering it. "The Sterling room is closed. Everyone leaves." Within 90 seconds, the restaurant emptied except for Anthony, sobbing Samuel, 3 guards, and terrified Linda. Anthony scooped Samuel up, the boy reaching over his shoulder toward Linda. He turned to her, trapped against the bar. "You're not going home tonight, Miss Martinez. This is kidnapping. Until I understand why my son thinks you're my mother," Anthony said with terrifying calm. "You belong to me." He nodded to James. "Bring the car. We're going to the estate." As James approached, Linda felt a sharp memory pierce her mind. A cold hospital room, beeping monitors, heavy sedation, a man's voice, "Take the baby before she wakes." As the black hood came down over her head, Linda's last thought was absolute certainty. She knew this child. She had carried him, given birth to him, and everyone had told her he was dead. The guest suite was a gilded cage. Linda stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching dawn break over Lake Michigan, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Below, guards patrolled the grounds with German shepherds, their silhouettes dark against the manicured lawn. The estate was massive, all stone and iron gates and old money that had been washed clean through legitimate businesses. She'd tried the door twice, locked from the outside. The windows didn't open. There was a bathroom stocked with expensive toiletries, a king bed with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and the suffocating knowledge that she was a prisoner. The lock clicked. Linda spun around as Anthony John entered, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. He'd changed from the suit into dark slacks and a black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. The neck tattoos were fully visible now, Celtic knots that wrapped around his throat like a collar. In his hand, he carried a manila folder. His presence filled the room, controlled fury barely contained beneath that polished exterior. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the leather chair by the window. Linda remained standing. "I want to go home." Sit down. Something in his voice made her obey. He pulled a second chair across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. He opened the folder. Linda Marie Martinez, 27 years old, born in Phoenix, Arizona, moved to Chicago 4 years ago to attend nursing school at Rush University. He looked up. You dropped out in your second year. Why? My father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Anthony's eyes were cold, clinical. You maxed out 3 credit cards paying for treatments insurance wouldn't cover, worked as a home health aide, then a barista, now a waitress. He closed the folder. No criminal record, no mob connections, no reason to be in my world. He leaned forward. So explain to me why my son, who has never spoken a word in his entire life, thinks you are his mother. Linda's hands trembled in her lap. I don't know. Try harder. The tears came before she could stop them. 3 years ago, I was desperate. My father needed experimental treatment in Mexico, $75,000. I had nothing. I wiped her eyes. I found an agency online, Genesis Fertility Institute. They had a program for surrogates, women willing to carry babies for couples who couldn't. Anthony went very still. They said they had a wealthy couple in Europe, anonymous, closed surrogacy. I'd never meet them, never know them. I'd carry their baby, deliver, and walk away with enough money to save my father's life. Her voice cracked. It seemed like the answer to everything. Where? Anthony's voice was barely a whisper. Geneva, Switzerland, Genesis Fertility Institute. The doctor was Helena Cross. She was searching for words. Professional, cold. She implanted the embryo in May. I carried him for 9 months. They monitored everything, controlled everything. I wasn't allowed to leave the clinic for the last trimester. October 8th, Anthony said, his face draining of color. 3 years ago. Yes. Linda looked up, confused. How did you... That's the day my wife went into labor in Geneva, same city. The air between them turned electric. Same clinic? Linda whispered. Anthony stood abruptly, walking to the window. His hands were shaking. Catherine called me from Geneva that morning, said she was in labor, that I needed to come immediately. By the time I got there, he stopped. Dr. Cross met me in the lobby. She said Catherine had died of a postpartum hemorrhage, but they'd saved the baby, saved Samuel. Linda felt dizzy. What time? What? What time did she deliver? I don't know. Afternoon, maybe 3 o'clock. I went into labor at dawn. There were complications. They sedated me heavily. When I woke, her voice broke. Dr. Cross told me the baby didn't make it. Umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. She said he died before they could save him. Did you see him? Anthony turned to face her. For maybe 5 seconds, they wheeled the incubator past my bed. Golden hair, blue eyes. He was so tiny. Tears streamed down her face. Dr. Cross said it was better if I didn't hold him, better if I didn't detach. They gave me the money and put me on a plane home the next day. Anthony was across the room in 3 strides. What else? What else do you remember? A birthmark, Gosalinda, on his right shoulder blade, shaped like a star. I asked the nurse about it, and she said... Anthony pulled out his phone with trembling hands. He swiped through photos and thrust the screen at her. It was Samuel in a bathtub, laughing, water in his golden curls. And there, on his right shoulder blade, was the birthmark. Perfect, star-shaped, unmistakable. Linda's knees gave out. Anthony caught her, lowering her back into the chair. That's him. That's my baby. That's Daniel. I named him Daniel. Anthony stepped back, running both hands through his hair. Catherine wasn't pregnant. She faked it. She must have hired you as a surrogate. And then he stopped, pieces clicking together. She took your baby, told you he was dead, told me he was hers. But why? Linda looked up at him. Why would she do that? Because I needed an heir, Anthony said quietly. My position requires it. Blood heir by 40, or leadership passes to my cousin, Marcus. He looked at Linda. Catherine was desperate. Our marriage was political. If she couldn't give me a son, he didn't finish. Linda stood on shaking legs. If Samuel is really mine, if that's really my baby, then we have a very serious problem, Ms. Martinez, Anthony interrupted, his voice turning cold again. Because legally, he's my son. I've raised him for 3 years, and I don't give up what's mine. He's not yours to keep, Linda shouted. He's mine. I carried him. I mourned him. Anthony pulled out his phone and made a call. Get Dr. Morrison up here now. I need a DNA test. Now. Full panel. He hung up and looked at Linda. We test. If you're lying, if this is some kind of con, I'm not lying. Then you just became the most dangerous person in my life. Because if Samuel isn't Catherine's biological son, Marcus will use it to destroy me. And anyone who knows that secret becomes a target. He walked to the door, then paused. Dr. Helena Cross, I'm bringing her here tonight, and she's going to tell me exactly what happened in Geneva 3 years ago. The door closed, the lock clicked, and Linda sank to the floor, finally understanding. Her baby hadn't died. He'd been stolen. At 3:47 a.m., Anthony's study felt like a tomb. Linda sat in the leather chair, unable to sleep, watching him pace behind his mahogany desk. The DNA samples had been sent to his private lab hours ago. They were waiting. The silence was suffocating. The door creaked open. Neither of them had heard footsteps. Samuel stood in the doorway in his pajamas, tiny blue cotton covered in cartoon lions. His stuffed animal dragged on the floor behind him. His golden curls were sleep mussed, his blue eyes half closed but seeking. The nanny must have dozed off. Anthony moved toward him. Samuel, buddy, you should be... But Samuel walked right past his father without a glance. He toddled directly to Linda, his small arms reaching up. Linda's breath caught. She looked at Anthony, uncertain, but he'd frozen in place. Samuel climbed into her lap with the determined focus of a child who knew exactly where he belonged. He curled against her chest, his head tucking under her chin, one small hand clutching her shirt. His breathing slowed, steadied. Mom, he whispered. Safe. Then he closed his eyes and went limp with sleep. Linda wrapped her arms around him instinctively, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The weight of him, the warmth, the way he fit against her, it was recognition written in bone and blood. Anthony stood motionless, watching. Something shifted in his expression. Jealousy, wonder, grief, all tangled together. In 3 years, Samuel had never sought comfort like this, never relaxed like this, never looked peaceful like this. A knock at the door. The lab technician entered, a young man in glasses holding a sealed envelope. Mr. John, the results. Anthony took the envelope, dismissed the tech with a nod, and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. His eyes scanned the page once, twice. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the paper. 99.99997% probability of maternity. His voice was hoarse. Linda Martinez is Samuel's biological mother. Linda closed her eyes, holding her son tighter. Her son, not a ghost, not a memory, real, alive, here. Another knock. James entered. Boss, Dr. Cross just landed. We're bringing her in now. Good. Anthony's expression turned to stone. Bring her directly here. 10 minutes later, Dr. Helena Cross was escorted into the study by two of Anthony's men. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed even at 4 in the morning. Chanel suit, pearls, the kind of polished elegance that came from catering to the ultra-wealthy. But her composure cracked when she saw Anthony's face. "Mr. John, I don't understand why I was brought here like some kind of..." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Linda holding Samuel. Her face went white as chalk. "Oh, God." "Sit down, Dr. Cross," Anthony said quietly. The quiet was worse than shouting. She sat, hands trembling in her lap. "Tell me about October 8th, 3 years ago. And don't lie. I already know some of it. I want to hear it from you." Dr. Cross's eyes darted between Linda and Anthony. "Mr. John, there are confidentiality agreements." "Your confidentiality agreements are worthless when you've committed fraud," Anthony interrupted. "Start talking. Now." Dr. Cross swallowed hard. "Catherine came to me 2 years before Samuel was born. She was desperate. Your marriage required an heir. She knew that. But she was infertile. Scarred uterus from a previous procedure." Anthony's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "She hired Ms. Martinez as a surrogate. The plan was gestational surrogacy. Catherine's egg, your sperm, Linda as the carrier. But Catherine's eggs weren't viable. We tried 5 times, all failures." Dr. Cross's voice dropped. Time was running out. Catherine authorized an alternative solution. "What solution?" Linda demanded, her voice shaking. "We used your egg," Dr. Cross said, not meeting her eyes, "with Anthony's sperm, without your knowledge. It was the only way to fulfill the contract." Linda felt sick. "You used my DNA without my consent? You signed a broad consent form. I signed to carry someone else's baby, not to have my own child stolen from me." Anthony raised a hand for silence. "Continue. What happened the day Linda went into labor?" Dr. Cross's composure crumbled. Everything went wrong. Catherine insisted on being at the clinic that day. She was going to fake going into labor, pretend she delivered. But Linda went into labor early that morning, real labor, and during Catherine's scheduled C-section to make it look like she'd given birth, Dr. Cross's voice cracked. She hemorrhaged, actual postpartum hemorrhage. She died on the table. The room went silent, except for Samuel's soft breathing. "I panicked," Dr. Cross whispered. "I had a dead client, a living surrogate who'd just given birth, and a baby who wasn't supposed to exist. So I made a decision." She looked at Linda. "I told you the baby died, and I gave him to Mr. John, told him Catherine had delivered before she passed." "You let me believe my son was dead," Linda said, her voice breaking. "For 3 years? You signed away your rights. You were compensated." Anthony slammed his hand on the desk. "Who else knows?" Dr. Cross flinched. "Your cousin, Marcus John." Anthony froze. "What?" "Marcus found out about the surrogacy arrangement. He approached me 6 months after Samuel was born. He paid me additional money to falsify all the records, ensure the secret stayed buried." Dr. Cross was crying now. "He said he was protecting you, but I think he was waiting." "Waiting for what?" Anthony's voice was deadly calm. "To use it against you. Your position requires a legitimate blood heir by 40. If Samuel is proven illegitimate, leadership passes to Marcus. He has copies of everything: the original contract, Linda's medical records, proof Samuel isn't Catherine's biological child." Anthony picked up his phone, made a call. "I need federal custody for Dr. Helena Cross. Fraud, falsified medical records, potential human trafficking. Yes, immediately." He hung up and looked at Dr. Cross. "You're going to cooperate fully with authorities about your fraud ring, but the information about Samuel stays sealed. Understood?" Within minutes, federal agents arrived, ones who clearly owed Anthony favors. As they led Dr. Cross away, Linda looked up at Anthony. You can just do that? Make federal charges appear? Anthony said coldly, I have federal judges who owe me favors, Ms. Martinez. Your son's legitimacy will be protected. But they both knew the truth. Marcus had evidence, and he was waiting to destroy them all. Morning sunlight streamed through the estate windows, turning the lakefront property golden. Linda found Anthony in Samuel's nursery, standing at the window, watching his son sleep in the crib. He was still wearing last night's clothes, the black sweater wrinkled, his beard shadowed darker, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice was raw. I've spent 3 years trying to help him. Specialists from Boston to California, therapists, medications, behavioral experts. Nothing worked. He finally looked at her. 10 minutes with you, and he spoke full sentences. Linda sank into the rocking chair, exhausted but too wired to sleep. What happens now? Anthony moved away from the window, his movements careful, controlled. Now I explained reality. He sat on the ottoman across from her. Marcus John is my cousin. He's ambitious, ruthless, and patient. He's been undermining my position for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What does he want? My position, head of the organization. Anthony leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Our family has rules, old world rules. The leader must have a legitimate blood heir by age 40, or leadership passes to the next in line. That's Marcus. Linda's stomach dropped. Samuel? If Marcus reveals Samuel came from a surrogate using your egg, that Catherine wasn't his biological mother, it creates a succession crisis. The old guard won't accept it. I'll lose everything. His hazel eyes locked onto hers. And you, Miss Martinez, are a loose end. If you disappear, the story disappears. Are you threatening me? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. I'm explaining reality, Anthony said. Marcus has people everywhere. Police, judges, people in this organization. You leave this house, you're dead within 24 hours. He'll make it look like an accident, a robbery, a random act of violence, and no one will question it. Linda stood, anger overriding fear. So I'm a prisoner. No, Anthony rose to face her. I'm offering you a solution. He walked to an antique cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring, platinum with a sapphire center stone surrounded by diamonds. It was stunning, old, important. My grandmother's ring, Anthony said quietly, belonged to her mother before that. 4 generations of John women have worn this. Linda stared at it, not understanding. Marry me, Anthony said, not for love, for survival. She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You're insane. Think about it. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. If you're my wife, you're untouchable. In our world, attacking a boss's spouse violates every code. Marcus can't touch you without declaring war on the entire organization. Samuel becomes our legal son, legitimized through marriage. You get protection, resources, your child back. I get to keep Samuel, maintain my position, eliminate Marcus's leverage. This is crazy. This is survival, Anthony interrupted, for all 3 of us. Linda looked at the ring, then at the crib where Samuel slept peacefully. Her son, the baby she'd mourned for 3 years, the child who'd called her mom. I have conditions, she said finally. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Negotiate then. I raise Samuel, my way. No more rotating nannies, no emotional distance. He needs stability, therapy, a real mother. Agreed. Access to therapy for both of us. This is traumatic for everyone. Done. Some freedom. I won't be locked in a gilded cage. Within reason, you'll have security, but you can move freely on the grounds, go into the city with protection. Linda took a breath. Separate bedrooms. This is business, nothing more. Something flickered in Anthony's eyes. Disappointment? Relief? But he nodded. Agreed. We'll need a cover story, Anthony said, all business again. The organization doesn't know about the surrogacy. We tell them you were my secret girlfriend during my marriage. Samuel was our affair baby. Catherine raised him as cover to save face. After her death, I brought you back into our lives. That makes me the other woman, Linda said bitterly. It makes you scandalous but acceptable. Illegitimacy through an affair is better than surrogacy fraud. It keeps Samuel legitimate enough. How quickly can we do this? Civil ceremony tomorrow. Judge owes me a favor. Quick, quiet, legal. He held out the ring. Welcome to the family, Mrs. John. Before Linda could respond, the doorbell rang. Moments later, a guard entered carrying a large white box with a black ribbon. Delivery from Mr. John, no return address. Anthony's expression darkened. He took the box carefully, setting it on the changing table. He opened it slowly, like diffusing a bomb. Inside was a child-sized navy suit, identical to the one Samuel wore, but it was covered in red paint, dripping like blood. Nestled among the fabric was a card in elegant script. Anthony read it out loud, his voice dead calm. The little prince looks so much like his mother. I wonder if he's as expendable as she was. Linda's blood ran cold. Marcus knew. He knew everything, and he was making his move. Anthony pulled out his phone. James, lock down the estate. Full security protocol. No one in or out without my direct authorization. He hung up and looked at Linda, his jaw clenched. Change of plans. We're not getting married tomorrow. What? We're getting married today, now. I'm not giving Marcus another 24 hours to make his move. He grabbed her hand, sliding the sapphire ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Get dressed, Linda. In 1 hour, you become my wife, and then we go to war. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse ceremony. A 10-minute affair with a judge, 2 witnesses, and signatures that bound Linda's life to Anthony's. Now came the real test. The Drake Hotel's grand ballroom glittered with Chicago's elite. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Marcus's daughter Sophia was marrying into the Castellano family, an alliance wedding that required every member of the organization to attend and show unity. This was Linda's first public appearance as Mrs. Anthony John. She stood at the ballroom entrance in an emerald green silk gown that clung to her curves. Her dark hair swept into an elegant updo. The sapphire ring caught the light with every movement. Beside her, Anthony cut an imposing figure in a charcoal suit, his hand protective on her lower back. Between them, Samuel held both their hands, adorable in a tiny tuxedo that made him look like a miniature version of his father. The whispers started immediately. That's her? The mistress. Poor Catherine. How shameless. That child. Is he really Anthony's? Linda held her head high, channeling every ounce of strength she possessed. She'd survived worse than gossip. Marcus approached during cocktail hour, cutting through the crowd with the confidence of a predator. He was 45, silver threading his temples, wearing a smile that didn't reach his cold gray eyes. Anthony, he said warmly, as if they were the best of friends. And this must be the infamous Linda Martinez, or should I say Linda John. His eyes swept over her, not with desire, but with calculation, sizing her up like prey. Welcome to the family, Marcus continued, though I must say it's all very sudden. 3 weeks ago, no one knew you existed. Now you're wearing grandmother's ring. Marcus, Anthony's voice held warning. But Marcus ignored him, focusing entirely on Linda. I'm curious, where did you two meet? How long were you together before Samuel came along? Linda met his gaze steadily. We met at a charity event for Children's Memorial Hospital. I was volunteering in the pediatric wing. Anthony was there making a donation. How romantic, his tone suggesting anything but. The connection was immediate, Linda continued, her voice steady. But we kept it quiet. Catherine was already sick by then. It felt wrong to flaunt a relationship when his wife was dying. Samuel needed stability, not scandal. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Samuel needed a mother figure, even if society judged us for it. Anthony watched Linda lie flawlessly, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. She was magnificent under pressure. "And Samuel seems so attached to you," Marcus observed, watching the boy cling to Linda's hand, almost as if he's known you his whole life. "Children know authenticity, Mr. John," Linda said coolly. "They know who's there for them, who loves them unconditionally." She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "Samuel remembers more than people think. He's starting to talk about his early years, the voices he heard, the faces he saw. It's remarkable what children retain." It was a bluff. Samuel barely remembered yesterday, but Marcus's face tightened imperceptibly. If the boy remembered the clinic, the doctors, the conversations about his origins. Marcus stepped closer, invading her space. "Careful, Linda. This family has a way of destroying women who don't belong. Ask Catherine." He smiled. "Oh wait, you can't." Anthony stepped between them instantly, his presence radiating danger. "That's enough, Marcus." The tension was thick enough to cut. Other family members had stopped talking, watching the confrontation with predatory interest. The band struck up a waltz. Anthony took Linda's hand. "Dance with me." He led her onto the floor, pulling her close. As they moved together, his breath warm at his ear, he whispered, "You were incredible. The charity story was perfect." "I wasn't entirely lying. I did volunteer at Children's Memorial before everything fell apart." They were dancing closer than necessary, their bodies aligned in a way that felt less like strategy and more like something entirely else. He's going to make his move soon. The threats, the confrontation, he's building to something. Linda looked up at him. "Let him come. I've survived worse than Marcus John." Anthony studied her face, really seeing her for the first time. "I believe you have." Suddenly, commotion erupted at the ballroom's edge. James, Anthony's head of security, was pushing through the crowd, his face pale. "Boss," James said urgently, pulling Anthony aside. Linda followed, despite protocol. "We have a situation. The estate." He showed him his phone. Security footage from Anthony's home. Perimeter alarms disabled. Guards on the ground unconscious but breathing. Samuel's nursery door hanging open. The nanny tied to a chair. Unharmed but terrified. The room ransacked. The message was clear. We can get to your son anytime we want. Anthony's controlled masks shattered. Raw fury and fear flooded his face. Linda grabbed his arm. "Samuel, where's Samuel?" "With us," James said quickly. "Secure suite upstairs with Thompson. But boss, they breached the estate. They got past everything." Anthony's jaw clenched. He looked across the ballroom to where Marcus stood by the bar, watching them with interest. "We're leaving," Anthony said. "Now." He didn't care about appearances, about the scene they'd cause. He grabbed Samuel from Thompson, held Linda's hand, and they pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Desks parted, shocked, whispering. As they reached the armored USV outside, Linda looked back at the Drake Hotel's entrance. Marcus stood there, backlit by the lobby lights, watching them flee. He was smiling. 2 days after the estate breach, Anthony insisted on proceeding with the annual summer gathering on Lake Michigan. The luxury yacht, ironically named the Catherine, was a family tradition. Refusing to attend would signal weakness, fear. Anthony never showed weakness. Linda wanted to stay home, to lock themselves in the fortress estate and wait out the storm, but Anthony was resolute. "We show strength, not fear. Marcus wants us cowering. We show up." Security was triple the normal level, guards everywhere, discreet but visible. Samuel wore a bright orange life vest, despite being nowhere near the railing, held firmly by Linda's hand at all times. It was a perfect day, sun sparkling on the water, champagne flowing, Chicago's skyline glittering in the distance. Samuel was more talkative now, chattering about the boats he saw, the seagulls, the waves. He stayed close to Linda, but was exploring with the cautious curiosity of a child learning to trust the world again. For the first time, he seemed normal, happy. Marcus arrived late, alone, carrying an expensive gift bag with a silver woe. "For the little prince," he said warmly, approaching Samuel with a politician's smile. "I heard you like boats." Linda's instincts screamed danger, but Samuel's blue eyes lit up. "Present? Go ahead, open it," Marcus encouraged. Inside was a vintage model sailboat, beautifully crafted, detailed, the kind that cost hundreds of dollars. Samuel gasped with delight. "Boat! Thank you, Uncle Marcus." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're welcome, Samuel. You know where the best place to sail it is? The bow, the front of the boat. The wind is perfect there." Anthony was across the deck, deep in conversation with the Castellano family. Linda stayed glued to Samuel's side as he ran toward the front of the yacht, clutching his new treasure. She followed, but realized too late they were being herded away from the crowd, around the cabin, out of sight. At the bow, Marcus was waiting. Two men Linda didn't recognize flanked him, not Anthony's security, Marcus's people. Linda reached for Samuel. "Come here, baby." One of the men grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She struggled, but his grip was iron. Marcus lifted Samuel up effortlessly, carrying him to the railing. "What a beautiful day for a swim, don't you think?" He held the boy over the churning water below, 50 feet of empty air between Samuel and Lake Michigan. Linda screamed, but the yacht's engine noise swallowed the sound. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said calmly, raising his voice over the wind. "Anthony has a choice, his empire or his bastard son. He steps down, names me successor in front of the entire organization, and I don't drop this child into the lake." Samuel was crying now, reaching for Linda. "Mom! Mom!" Linda fought against her captor, fury overriding terror. "He's 3 years old, you monster!" "He's leverage," Marcus corrected coldly. "Nothing more." Linda forced herself to stop struggling, to think. She went still, her voice dropped to calculated calm. "You're right, he's leverage, which means you won't drop him." Marcus frowned, uncertain. "Because if you do," Linda continued, her tone steady as a knife, "you lose your only bargaining chip, and Anthony will hunt you to the ends of the earth. There will be nowhere you can hide." She took a step closer, ignoring the man still gripping her arm. "Your hands are shaking, Marcus. The boat is moving. One wrong move and you lose everything." Marcus's confidence wavered. He was afraid of actually dropping Samuel, afraid of the consequences. Linda used the split-second distraction. She stomped hard on her captor's instep, drove her elbow back into his throat. He released her, gasping. She rushed Marcus, grabbing Samuel just as Marcus's grip loosened from the shock of her momentum. But physics betrayed her. She was leaning too far over the railing. Samuel clutched to her chest, gravity pulling them both forward toward the water. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, hauling them both back to safety. Anthony. He'd been there the whole time, silently approaching from the starboard side, while Linda distracted Marcus. He set Linda and Samuel down behind him, simultaneously drawing a gun from his jacket, aiming it at Marcus's head. "Don't move." Marcus raised his hands, his two men frozen. "You won't shoot me, not in front of all these witnesses." "You just threatened my son's life," Anthony said, dead calm. "Self-defense." James and the security team emerged from around the cabin, weapons drawn, having followed Anthony's signal. Marcus realized he'd lost. His men were already being subdued, forced to their knees. "James," Anthony said, never lowering his weapon, "call the Coast Guard. Mr. John has had a mental episode. He'll be taken to a secure facility for psychiatric evaluation." In Anthony's world, this was worse than death. Isolation, powerlessness, watching his empire crumble while locked in padded walls. "This isn't over," Marcus spat at Linda. "The truth will come out." Linda, holding Samuel tight, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "The truth is that you just tried to murder a child in front of a dozen cameras." She pointed upward. The yacht's security system, cameras everywhere, recording everything. Good luck explaining that to the organization. Marcus's face went white. He'd been so focused on the confrontation, he'd forgotten about surveillance. The Coast Guard arrived within minutes. Marcus was taken away in restraints, while the other guests pretended they'd seen nothing. Plausible deniability. Marcus had acted alone, clearly unstable. A family tragedy. Once he was gone, Linda's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the deck, adrenaline crashing, Samuel still clutched in her arms. "Mom saved me," Samuel said, looking up at Anthony. "Mom and Daddy." Anthony knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both. For the first time in decades, his hands were shaking. "I could have lost you both," he whispered into Linda's hair. And Linda realized this had stopped being business weeks ago. A week after the yacht incident, the estate had transformed into a fortress. New security systems, additional guards, bulletproof glass installed in every window. Linda recovered in the main bedroom, bruised ribs wrapped tight, psychological trauma harder to bandage. Samuel had nightmares. He'd wake screaming about water, about falling, about the bad man. But daily therapy sessions with Dr. Reeves were helping. Slowly, carefully, the boy was learning he was safe. Anthony spent his days managing the fallout. Marcus's faction within the organization had tried to rally, claiming Anthony had orchestrated a coup, but the video evidence was damning. Marcus attempting to murder a child, threatening the boss, breaking every code the organization held sacred. Most sided with Anthony. The few who didn't quietly disappeared or found themselves facing federal indictments for unrelated crimes. Marcus remained in a private psychiatric facility, the kind with no visitors, no phone calls, no hope of release. His assets were being systematically absorbed into Anthony's operations, a lesson to anyone else who might consider betrayal. Dr. Helena Cross had pled guilty to fraud, falsifying medical records, and conspiracy. Her testimony to federal investigators had blown open a trafficking ring, dozens of falsified surrogacies over 15 years, babies stolen and sold to wealthy clients who wanted to avoid adoption scrutiny. The FBI contacted Linda. Anthony's lawyers were present for every interview, protecting her from charges, but she gave her statement, told her story, and learned she wasn't alone. 3 other surrogates had been told their babies died. 3 other families had unknowingly raised stolen children. Reunifications were beginning, messy, complicated, but happening. Small victories amid the wreckage. In the nursery, Samuel was transformed, more verbal, laughing, playful. He called Linda Mom naturally now, without hesitation. He'd started calling Anthony Papa, not the formal father Anthony had tried to teach him, but the warm, childish Papa that made Anthony's eyes shine with emotion he tried to hide. One evening, as Linda tucked Samuel into bed, he looked up at her with those impossibly blue eyes. "Mom, why was I sad before?" Linda sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his golden curls. "Sometimes our hearts know things our heads don't understand. You were missing someone you needed." "You," Samuel said simply. "Yes, baby, me." "I'm not sad anymore," Samuel whispered, already drifting to sleep. "I have you and Papa now." Linda kissed his forehead, blinking back tears. Her relationship with Anthony was shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. He'd stopped maintaining emotional distance, found excuses to be near her, breakfast together every morning, walking the estate grounds in the evening, reading to Samuel before bed. They'd become a unit without discussing it, a family without acknowledging it. One night, long after Samuel was asleep, a soft knock came at Linda's bedroom door. She opened it to find Anthony standing there, still dressed but disheveled, his beard showing gray she'd never noticed before. He looked uncertain, an expression she'd never seen on his face. "Can we talk?" She nodded, stepping aside. He entered but left the door open, respecting the separate rooms rule, and sat carefully on the edge of her bed. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally, staring at his hands. "Do what?" "Be a husband, a real one." He looked up at her, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "I've only known transactions, arrangements, power dynamics. Everything in my life has been about control and strategy, but this," he gestured between them, "I don't know the rules here." Linda sat beside him, close but not touching. "You've been protecting us every day. You held me when I cried after the yacht. You play with Samuel every morning, even when you have meetings. You made him laugh yesterday. That's real, Anthony. That's being a husband, a father." "The marriage was supposed to be business," he said quietly. "I know." Long pause. The air between them crackled with tension, with everything unspoken. "Is it still?" Anthony turned to face her fully. "Just business?" Linda's heart raced. She could lie, could maintain the safety of their arrangement, could protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting the truth. "I don't know," she whispered. "Is it?" Anthony reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Not for me, not anymore." Linda's breath caught. Then she leaned forward and he met her halfway. The kiss was slow, tentative, full of fear and hope, and 3 years of grief transforming into something new. His hand cupped her face, her fingers curled into his shirt, and for a moment nothing existed but this connection, genuine and terrifying. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Anthony rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he whispered, though he made no move to leave. "Okay," Linda breathed, though her hand was still clutching his shirt. He stood finally, walking to the door, then paused, looking back at her. "Linda?" "Yes?" "Thank you for saving our son." "Our son." The words settled into Linda's chest, warm and permanent. "Our son," she repeated, savoring them like a promise. Anthony smiled, genuine, soft, nothing like the predator who terrified her weeks ago, and closed the door gently behind him. Linda touched her lips, still feeling the kiss, and realized she was falling in love with her husband. 6 months had changed everything. The estate no longer felt like a fortress. Sunlight streamed through windows that once seemed designed to keep the world out. Children's toys scattered across expensive Persian rugs, plastic dinosaurs on antique tables, crayons on leather ottomans. Samuel's artwork hung in Anthony's study, taped proudly beside million-dollar paintings, finger-painted sons and stick-figure families that meant more than any masterpiece. Linda's touches were everywhere. Plants on windowsills, family photographs in silver frames, color where there had only been gray and black. The house breathed now, lived. Anthony had stepped back from the violent side of operations. He was still the boss, still commanded absolute respect, still dangerous when necessary, but he was choosing different battles now, focusing on legitimate businesses, using his considerable power to reform rather than destroy. The shipping companies were cleaning up their labor practices. The construction firms were following safety regulations. Small changes, but meaningful. He'd never be a saint, but he was trying to be a man his son could be proud of. Linda had enrolled in online classes, finishing the nursing degree she'd abandoned years ago. She was also working with the Victim Services Division, helping other surrogacy fraud survivors navigate the legal and emotional aftermath, turning her trauma into purpose. 3 women had been reunited with their children because of her advocacy. 3 families rebuilt from ashes. Samuel was thriving. He attended a private preschool now, with discreet security that looked like regular parents, and had actual friends. He spoke constantly, sometimes too much, making up for 3 years of silence with an endless stream of observations and questions and stories. He was a normal, happy, gloriously loud 4-year-old. Their marriage had evolved in ways Linda hadn't anticipated. 3 months ago, Anthony had fallen asleep reading in her room. She'd covered him with the blanket, let him stay. The next night, he'd knocked on her door. "I sleep better when you're near." A week later, his clothes appeared in her closet. A month after that, they stopped calling it her room and started calling it ours. It hadn't been announced or discussed. It had simply happened, natural as breathing. Now they were planning a real wedding, not the hurried courthouse affair that saved their lives, but a celebration of what they'd become. Anthony had proposed properly 2 weeks ago. He'd taken her to the garden where Samuel played, gotten down on one knee while their son held the ring box with the solemnity of a child entrusted with something precious. "I'm asking you to marry me for real this time," Anthony had said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for protection, not for convenience, not because we have to." He'd taken her hands. "Because I love you, because you made me believe in things I thought were fairy tales, because I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life." Linda had said yes while Samuel cheered and threw flower petals he'd been secretly collecting. The ceremony would be small. 50 people in the estate garden, only those they genuinely trusted and cared about. Linda's mother and siblings were flying in from Arizona, Anthony's inner circle, the ones who'd proven loyal, Samuel's preschool teacher, who'd helped him adjust, Dr. Reeves, whose therapy had saved them all, James, who'd become more friend than employee. Linda stood in front of the mirror now, adjusting her dress. Simple, white lace, tea-length, with wildflowers woven into her loose hair. Nothing like the designer gown she'd worn to Marcus's daughter's wedding. This was her, authentic, unpretentious, real. A knock on the door. Samuel burst in wearing a tiny navy suit identical to Anthony's, his golden curls combed neatly. He carried the ring pillow like it was made of glass. "Mom, Papa says we start in 10 minutes. I get to walk with you down the aisle and give Papa the rings and everything." His blue eyes were incandescent with excitement. Linda knelt down, straightening his tie. "You're going to be the best ring bearer ever." "I know," Samuel said seriously. "I've been practicing." From the doorway, Anthony appeared. He wore a navy suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, his beard neatly trimmed. He looked more relaxed than Linda had ever seen him, the dangerous edge softened but not gone, the intensity in his hazel eyes now focused entirely on love rather than survival. He looked at Linda and stopped breathing. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding," Linda said, smiling. "We've already done this once. I'm not following traditional rules." He crossed to her, took her hands. "I just wanted to say, before we go out there, thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." Samuel hugged both their legs. "Can we get married now? I really want cake." They laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and walked together toward the garden where their family was waiting. Not the family they were born into, but the one they'd chosen, the one they'd fought for, the one that had saved them all. September afternoon light filtered through the trees, turning the estate garden golden. White chairs lined a path scattered with rose petals. String lights hung between branches like captured stars, and the air smelled of lavender and possibility. 50 guests filled the seats. Anthony's inner circle, men who'd proven their loyalty with more than words. Linda's mother sat in the front row, tears already streaming, flanked by Linda's 2 siblings who'd flown in from Arizona. Dr. Reeves was there, the therapist who'd helped Samuel find his voice again. James stood as Anthony's best man, pride evident on his normally stoic face. This was everything the courthouse ceremony hadn't been. That had been survival, strategy, a transaction to save their lives. This was joy, choice, celebration. The music shifted, not traditional wedding march, but something softer, more intimate. Linda appeared at the garden entrance, Samuel holding her hand with the careful concentration of a child who understood this moment mattered. Anthony stood beneath the rose-covered arbor, and when he saw her, his breath simply stopped. His eyes, those hazel eyes that had once been so cold, so calculating, shone with unshed tears. His hand went to his chest, over his heart, as if to keep it from breaking open with emotion. Linda's voice was steady, clear as bells. "I take you as my protector, my challenge, my home. You gave me back my son, and yourself in the process. I choose you, today and always." They exchanged rings, the sapphire on Linda's finger, now joined by a matching platinum band on Anthony's. Samuel giggled when they kissed, the sound bright and perfect, and the guests erupted in applause. The reception unfolded like a dream. Music and laughter, champagne toasts that made Anthony's men wipe their eyes when they thought no one was looking. Linda's mother told embarrassing childhood stories, while Anthony listened with genuine fascination, learning about the woman he loved before grief had carved her hollow. Samuel was everywhere, stealing frosting from the cake when he thought no one watched, dancing with Linda's sister, showing James his model sailboat, being gloriously, perfectly normal. A joyful child who'd forgotten what silence tasted like. As evening fell and the string lights glowed brighter, Anthony pulled Linda onto the makeshift dance floor. She fit against him perfectly now. No hesitation, no fear, just home. A small tug on Anthony's pants. He looked down to find Samuel staring up at them, his face serious. "What is it, buddy?" Samuel's expression broke into the widest smile. "I have the best mom and papa in the whole world." Linda's breath caught. She bent down, scooping Samuel into her arms, and Anthony wrapped them both in his embrace. The three of them swayed to music that seemed written just for this, for them, for a family that had been stolen, shattered, and rebuilt into something unbreakable. Around them, the world continued, but in that moment, held by the people who'd become his reason for breathing, Anthony John, Chicago's most feared crime boss, the man who'd built an empire on calculated ruthlessness, finally understood what it meant to be complete. Not through power, not through control, through love, through choice, through the family he'd never known he needed until a waitress with dark eyes and a broken heart had walked into his life and changed everything. Samuel's head rested on Linda's shoulder, his eyes dropping with exhaustion and contentment. "Home," he whispered, not meaning the estate or the garden or any physical place, meaning this, them, the three of them together. "Yes, baby," Linda murmured, meeting Anthony's eyes over their son's golden curls. Home. And it was. If you're not subscribed yet, let me ask you something. Why? Was Samuel's story not worth 2 seconds of your time? Did Linda's 3 years of grief mean nothing? Did their happy ending not earn a simple click? I pour my heart into finding and sharing these stories, stories of hope, survival, and love against impossible odds. If you felt something today, prove it. Click the subscribe button now. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it tells me you actually care about the next family fighting for their chance at happiness. Don't just watch and leave. Be here for what comes next.